They're sometimes fun, sometimes scary. We've enjoyed them. I thought there was three. Okay, there's not. We've enjoyed them through our life. We've enjoyed them when we were little. We still sometimes get a kick out of them. We can make shadow little figurines out of them. Graceland still loves it when she comes to the house. She wants Papa to get the flashlight out, turn the light out in the den, and we play Pookie Fighter. And all you have to do is wiggle your fingers in front of a flashlight, and shadows form on our wall or our ceiling, and she loves Pookie Fighter. So yes, ma'am, we play it. As long as she wants, if she's 20 years old and she wants to play Pookie Fighter, we'll play Pookie Fighter. But nevertheless, we enjoy shadows. Shadows are, of course, by definition, if we look at definition for a second, by definition, it's when a ray of light hits an object that falls then on the other side. We understand that. We understand what shadows are. But it's interesting that the word shadow is found 80 times in our Bible. Now, you may have not realized that much, but therein lies the truth. And there are some of those verses that just really are interesting to think about. Because we know a shadow that we cast. We cast it, of course, when we go outside, when the sun is shining. Especially in a room where there's maybe just one central light, not lights that balance out all over the room, but just one central light. And there are shadows that are cast. Those shadows, with regards to the way the word is used in the Bible, have different meanings. Let's look at some of those. The first one tells us of the shortness of life. It's found in 1 Chronicles 29:15. For we are aliens and pilgrims before you. Heard this before? Yes, I heard it in 1 Peter. As were all of our fathers, our days on earth are as a shadow, without hope. David, in addressing Solomon taking over, makes this plea to God. And notice what he says. He says, our days on earth are as a shadow. Days on earth are short. We know that life is a blessing given to us by God who gives all life and breath and all things. That's what Paul told the Athenians on Mars Hill in Acts 17. We talked about this morning for just a second. It's God that gives the spirit of man, according to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1, but it is life as well. God gives life. Life is a blessing that has come to us from God. Life is short, isn't it? You think about how the Bible pictures life, and it pictures life like a race. It pictures it like a journey. It pictures it like things that are short. They happen, they exist, but they're short. James says that our life's like a vapor that appears for a short time and vanishes away. Someone said that our life is really, in many ways, like a little burst of steam coming off of hot coffee early in the morning. It's like the morning dew that's here for a little while and then gone. Our life is short. We can't get around that fact. You might say, well, Lord says that the days of our years are 70 years, and by reason of strength 80 years, and we're soon cut off and fly away, Psalm 90, verse 10. And so that seems like a good span. Yeah, that's true. But shortness, the idea of shortness of life comes when you look at the continuum of life or the continuum of time. Think about, they're coming to get you, Christian. Think about time from the standpoint of, let's say, Adam to now. Our lifespan, Lord willing, we live to be 70, 80. Talking to a lady this afternoon, she's 95 years old. I pronounced that she could have 5 more years. No, I did, but we were kidding. But I hope she has much longer than that. But we see time, even that amount of time, is just but a speck on the timeline of the world. So life is short. Life is short at its very best. Here today, it's gone tomorrow. So what does that tell us? What does that teach us? It teaches us that we should number our days, that we should spend our time cautiously. The time that we have is time that is given, and it is to be used. It is to be used wisely. We've used Ephesians chapter 5 before, where Paul says that we're to walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time. Verse 16, it's the idea, not redeeming from the standpoint of buying back, but redeeming there means to make good use of, to use your time wisely. Well, how do we do that? We do what we can. We spend our time doing what we can to help others. Now, there are certain things in life. Let's kind of put this off to the side. There are certain things in life that just are given. We have to eat. We have to spend time eating. We have to spend time resting. Excuse me. We have to spend time working. Those things are given. But what do we do with the rest of our time? What do we do with our remaining time? We spend it wisely. We do help others. We do spend time doing what we can in the assistance of others, making them laugh, helping them out in a difficult situation or a difficult time, doing what we can. We spend our time, secondly, wisely by keeping it focused. What's our focus? For some, their focus is making money, and they do it well, but that's their only focus in life. Make more money. They don't have time for the spiritual. They don't have time for anything else or anybody else. Make more money. Conversations I've had with people through the years. And I recall one where that was really their whole focus. Make money. They asked me about making money. I said, well, it depends on whether you're going to thump the collection plate or you're going to put something in it. But our focus really needs to be not about things of this earth. God's promised to take care of us here in this earth. God's promised to get us through this earth. But He's also told us, keep your focus. Set your affections on things above, not on things of the earth. And we do those things, according to Colossians chapter 3. We do that. God's promised to take care of us. Spend our time wisely by keeping our focus and keeping our focus on heaven. We spend our time, we spend it wisely by appreciating the journey. We're all just that, on a journey, aren't we? That's our life. And our life journey needs to be such that we keep not only the proper perspective, but we learn to appreciate the journey that we're on. In Matthew chapter 6, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, not exactly the middle, you might even say not even the last third, but thereabouts, Jesus addresses the subject of worry. Take no thought for tomorrow, that paragraph there. And he reminds us, after he talks about being anxious, don't worry, he talks about in verse 34, sufficient of the days the evil thereof. He says, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Sufficient the days the evil thereof. Just focus on today. We're all the time focused on tomorrow. And yes, we do have to make certain plans for the future. If we don't plan for the future, financially, when can we retire? If we don't plan for the future with regards to our health, we abuse it, and then maybe our life's cut short. Maybe not always, but maybe sometime. We need to, of course, plan for the future, but Jesus says, focus on today. Focus on today. With life being short as well, we're reminded of the fact that we as individuals need to, as we appreciate the journey, we need to understand that it will come to an end, and we need to live life. Live life expecting the Lord to return. Live life with the idea, one day the Lord's coming back. And when He comes back, I need to be ready, because I know that it will end. The shortness of life is an actuality. And so, as David was addressing God, and he was pleading for God's help in 1 Chronicles 29, he reminds God, and he reminds all that were listening to him, this is short. This is short. We need to be prepared. We need to be ready to run the race. Tim McGraw back several years ago had a song, Live Like You or Die. And he talked about, he really was a song written based upon his father, Tug McGraw, who was the baseball pitcher for the Phillies and for a few other teams. But to hear the idea of sitting in doctor's office and to hear the doctor come in and say that you have cancer, well, what do you do? What do you do? How do you react? And he talked about, going fishing and doing this and doing that and doing the other. Well, we need to live our life like that. Life is short. But then the second shadow that we find, oh, by the way, we're not going through all 80 of the times that the word shadows mentioned. We're going through 79 of them. The second one, because some of these repeat, but the second one we want to talk about is Job chapter 10 and verse 21. Before I go to the place from which I shall not return, to the land of darkness and the shadow of death. It's Job is talking there. Job is talking about his faith and talking about where he's going. And notice that he talks about the land of darkness, the shadow of death. One day we're going to die. We can't get around it. Just you've heard the old expression, you can't get out of here alive. Well, you can't. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 reminds us. It's appointed men once to die, and after that, the judgment. We can appreciate that, and we can understand that, and we can see that because we pass by the cemetery, and we go by the funeral home, and we either through the website or, of course, back years ago, we used to do it in the paper. You get the paper out and look at the obituary and see who passed away. Life comes to an end. Life is not forever. Now, there are several reasons for that. Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 5 that death has come upon all men, for all have sinned, but that death came about because of Adam, wherein by one man's sin, death entered the world. Admittedly, and I'll admit within that context there, Romans chapter 5, I don't think Paul was necessarily addressing the idea of physical death. I think he was talking about spiritual death. But at the same time, too, once we think about that verse, the principle truly applies. Why? Because when God made Adam, he placed him in the garden, right? And there in the garden, Adam had the right tree of life. Adam messed up. And when Adam was kicked out of the garden, God put a permanent guard, if you will, so that man could not go back into the garden, thus could never again have the opportunity to avail himself of the tree of life. Death in the world. It's an interesting concept. But the Bible says we're going to die. How, when, we do not know. David said in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 3, he says, there's but a step between me and death. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 2, there's time to be born, time to die. But how do we approach death? The Bible, interestingly enough, talks about it from a standpoint of an exodus. We looked at that last week. We looked at 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 1. For we know that if third of the house, this tent, taken down, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. It's a leaving of camp. It's an exodus, the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about it as being a race. One day, we sigh our last sigh. One day, we breathe our last breath. But the Bible pictures that as a good time. That's so interesting. Or at least to me it is. Maybe not to you. It's interesting to me. Take Revelation chapter 14, verse 11. John is seeing this picture. It's this picture of these animals and all of these things that are going on. These horsemen and these bowls and all of these things. And John gets caught up in that vision. On more than one occasion, John is reminded, right. Go back through and read the book of Revelation and you'll find out where God says, right. In other words, quit watching the movie, start writing. So he says, what? He says, blessed are they that die in the Lord, henceforth. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Death is looked at as a good thing. Solomon felt the same way. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is rather to be had than precious ointment. And the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Boy, that's a head scratcher for me. It's a head scratcher from one standpoint because you think, man, I don't want to go. But yet you think the other way, you think, won't it be great when we get there? No more moving days. No more anxiety. No more problems. No more heartaches. No more hurts. No more difficulties. You think, well, okay. But preacher, I don't want to get on that bus today. Gotcha. I understand. It's very hard for us to be as the early Christians were, in which in the catacombs of early Christianity, there's written the words throughout the catacombs, the burial places, Maranatha. The word Maranatha literally means Lord, come quickly. Of course, these were people that were being heavily persecuted and were desiring of the Lord to end it all. But Job says, he says, there's a shadow. The shadow is the shadow of death. Will we all die? Sure. Will we all have our race come to an end? Yes. But Paul said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Paul was ready. Now, he stayed on. It's kind of interesting because he would write that to the church of Philippi in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. He wrote it then, if you want to put it in chronological thought or order, he wrote it 62 AD. He wrote it right at the end of the book of Acts. He will live, at least best we can tell, some 6 years longer. So while he says, I'm in a strait betwixt two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, nevertheless to remain here in the flesh is more needful of you, he was willing to do that. It still didn't change one fact. And here's the fact. He died. It's much like those in Genesis chapter 5. We'll not go through all those, but sometime this week, go back and read Genesis chapter 5. Interesting chapter. That's the chapter where you find a fellow by the name of Methuselah. And you find out the over 900 years that he lived. And just go back in Genesis 5, and here's what's so interesting about it, is it talks about all these guys that lived. And it talks about how long they lived, and they lived hundreds of years. But the interesting fact to me is not that these fellows lived hundreds of years. I mean, that's something else. But here's what's the interesting fact. Go back and read the verses. It'll mention a name. It'll mention how long they lived. And then it has these words, and he died. And then it'll mention the next one. And it'll tell how many years he lived. And he died. Yeah, we're all going to die. So therefore, as we're trying to put a conclusion to all these, as we did with shortness of life, therefore, we have to ask ourselves, if we're all going to die, what do we do? One simple admonition. We prepare. We get ready. In Amos chapter 5, and we'll study this again this Wednesday night in auditorium class. Amos reminds the people because of what they'd faced, their difficulties, and because that they were not living the life that they should, and yet judgment was going to come upon them, and they would be overtaken as a nation. There was one simple answer in Amos chapter 5, verse 12. He says, prepare to meet your God. Now, like I say, he wasn't talking about the judgment as we think about it. He was talking about a nation coming and taking them over. But he says, you prepare to meet God. An interesting thought. Paul talked about verses that we're very, very, very familiar with. I've fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. Henceforth, there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, should give me in that day. And not to me only, but to all them also who love his appearing. 2 Timothy chapter 4. But notice what he said. I've done all I can do. Can't go any further. Can't change anything. I've fought the fight. I've done all that's within me. And so therefore, what was he saying? Now, this is probably 68 AD. This is when he's about to die. He said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to move on. The shadow of death is that which we all face. Whoa, missed one. Psalm 57 puts our third shadow. Psalm 57 and verse 1. Be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me. For my soul trusts in you, and in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed. In the shadow of your wings. Reminds us of Deuteronomy 33, where it talks about God being our refuge. God's our protector, our protection. We have different things that protect us. Always interesting. I don't care for boxing. I don't care for MMA myself. You may, and that's fine. But it's always interesting to me to watch those guys, big tough guys, going to beat the hooey out of the other guy, and they have all these bodyguards that are around them as they walk out to the ring. Never figured that one out. But nevertheless, it happens. You have protectors. President of the United States has those that protect them, and then they are guaranteed that for a certain amount of time afterwards. Protection comes. Some folks carry. They have carry permits, and they carry. That's for their protection. That's something that they can do legally. Some carry them illegally. But some have other means of protection. Some have spray that they carry with them at all times. Protection. Some have learned martial arts in order to protect themselves. Some lock their doors, protect themselves. The psalmist says here, God, I want you to put me within the shadow of your wings. I want you to protect me. I want you to protect me. Well, when? Well, really at all times. Notice the context. Until these calamities, and I encourage you to go back and read Psalm 51. It's like all the other Psalms, all 149 other Psalms. It's beautiful. But he's going through a hard time in Psalm 57. Lord, I want you to protect me. Now, I think we need to maybe draw at least a conclusion here with regards to God's protection before we talk about it a little bit further. God protects us in, but God does not protect us from. You're going to have to fill in the blanks on that one, preacher. Glad to do it. God never told us you're not going to have problems as a child of God. The health and wealth preachers that are on TV constantly that just say, just have faith in God and you'll never have any problems. Do not read the same Bible I read. Because if they did, then I have to ask them some questions. Why was Jeremiah laughed at? Why was he thrown into a pit? Why was David? Why did he go read Psalms, the terrible things that he went through? Why did Jesus suffer? Why did he die on a cross? Why did Paul go through the shipwrecks and the beatings and the imprisonments and stonings and the tumults? Why did Job? Why did he lose everything, basically? These were folks that were people of God. And yet they had difficulties. They had problems. Where's their shadow of the Lord's wings that they were under? God didn't protect them from those problems, but God did protect them in those problems. You see, we're never going to be overloaded with problems so that only thing we can do and the only possible way out is to throw up our hands and say, I give up. The protection that God provides for us is to carry us through those problems, to help us manage through those problems, to come out on the other side. And so we're not overthrown with problems to the point of simply just saying, I surrender. But we're carried through them. That's why the psalmist reminds us in Psalm 18, the Lord's our rock, our fortress, our deliverer, our high tower. In him will I trust. The Lord's my rock, and run to him. The Lord's my fortress, run to him. He's my deliverer. Now, Peter was right in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation. God provides a way of escape. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. Jay read that for our text this morning. Very good reading. God provides a way of escape in the midst of our temptation. See, our temptation doesn't have to overtake us unless we decide for it to. God's protection then is for us, and therefore God's protection should be taken up on. We're assured of it. We know that it's there. But by faith, we say, okay, Lord, get me through this. You're going to get me through it. God becomes the refuge in the shadow of his wings, that if we will but trust in him and rely in that shadow, he'll carry us through. Story is told. It was actually told in National Geographic. And this has been actually quite a few years ago. The story occurred, according to the article in National Geographic, it occurred in Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone had had a fire, terrible fire, destroyed quite a few acres of land. And after the fire had passed, and they had gotten the fire extinguished, there were forest rangers and different ones that were going up into the hills, to the mountains, and see the devastation and see what could be done and see what needed to be done. And a group went up to a particular area, and they saw beside an old, very charred tree a bird standing in attention, completely charred, lifeless, of course, but completely charred. And they couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand to watch that bird that had just simply been consumed with fire. So one of the individuals picked up a stick and he just went over to poke the bird so that it would fall over so that they wouldn't have to see it. And when they did, out from under the wings of that bird came 3 chicks, 3 babies. I don't know really what happened in the rest of the story. Don't remember from that point on. To be honest, really didn't want to read it from that point on. But there that mother gave all that she could give for those 3 chicks, and she protected them from the fire. God does the same for us. God's our refuge and strength, very present help in time of trouble. The shadow of God's wings protect us in the midst of our difficulties, in the midst of what we're going through. We may not understand it at times, and we may not appreciate it at times, but by faith we walk, right? That's what we studied last Sunday morning. And as we walk by faith, we have the assurance of God's protection in the midst of our difficulties because of the shadow of his wing. But then James 1 gives us a shadow. Every good gift and every perfect gift from above comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Pick up what James said. James says that God is immutable. What does immutable mean? It means he doesn't change. Isn't that what he said? He said, Father of lights. There's no variation. There's no shadow of turning. God is the same. Boy, that's a great promise, isn't it? When we think about God being the same, we have to understand that God being immutable, he doesn't change. We all change, right? We grow, we evolve. You might say, don't use the word evolve in church. Oh, yeah, you can. Why? Because we're growing. We are evolving. Do you still have the same faith you had 10 years ago? Surely it's grown. Surely it's stronger, better. I'm sure it is. God, however, is full grown, fully evolved, doesn't change. His essence is the same. He said in Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6, he says, I'm the Lord God, I don't change. We know that his attributes are the same. In other words, when we go through and we could list all of his attributes, all the omnis, the omnipresent, the omniscient, and all of those things, but we could list the other attributes of God, his love, his kindness. And remember, he says that I've loved you with an everlasting love, Jeremiah 31, verse 3, talking to the children of Israel, but in many ways as well, talking to us. His attributes, they don't change. They're always the same. They're the same today as they were years ago. The Lord is good. His truth is everlasting. And his mercy endures to all generations. Isn't that what the psalmist said in Psalm 100, verse 5? So his essence doesn't change. His attributes doesn't change, or do not change, excuse me, proper English. But also, thirdly, his counsel does not change. The word of the Lord is settled. Psalm 33, verse 11 says that it's settled. It's always been settled, and it'll always be settled. God's word doesn't change. This that we have today, is that which is true. And we don't have to be concerned about, well, is it going to change? Well, wait a minute, preacher, wait a minute. This morning, you talked about the old law was abrogated, the old law was done away with, and we're under the new law. God changed his law, but everybody knew, right? One of the things we didn't point out this morning, meant to, but the clock got going faster than my mouth got going, was the fact that Jeremiah had told folks what God had said with regards to Jeremiah 31, that there's coming a day in which I'll make a new covenant with you, with the house of Israel. Not according to the covenant that I made with your fathers. A new covenant that the Hebrew writer said is the New Testament. God makes his will known, but he doesn't change his word. In other words, what we have today that we call the New Testament doesn't change. Now, things and people and their philosophy have changed. In our auditorium class this morning, we studied Romans chapter 1, and we studied, as we finished it, we talked about how those that were people of the world, more specifically, Paul called Gentiles, he says one of the things that they were doing was they were practicing homosexuality. Now, I don't care to get back into this evening, other than to say this, that when Paul talked about that there, one of the things that has changed, as we talked about in class, is not the numbers of folks that practice homosexuality today, but the acceptance of society for that act. Whereas it was once deemed as something that men should not and women should not participate in, now it's all right if you want to, according to the world's standards. But God's law hasn't changed with regards to that. God's law is not different. Well, we could go on and talk about different philosophies and ideas, but God's word is settled. Well, okay. Therefore, we take comfort. We take comfort in the fact that God has revealed to us a stable way. A stable way of life, a stable way of the future, and a stable way to get there. On the day of judgment, because God is a righteous God and God is a just God, when we stand before the Lord and give an account of our life, He's not going to say, ha ha, I had a new or different trick that you didn't know about, and so therefore you're not going to heaven. That's not God. You see, James reminds us God's the same. And reminding us that God's the same, we know that His word is the same. It's settled. It means also that I can pray with great assurance. I can know that He'll hear my prayers, He'll answer my prayers, and He'll give me exactly what I need. Why? Because He's promised me. And so as I look through the Bible and I find promise after promise after promise, promise of His care, promise of His comfort, promise of His reassurance, promise of Him sending His Son back to this world from the standpoint of judging, these promises, the promise of eternity, I can bank on it. I know that it's real. I know that it's true. And so God's shadow from the standpoint of He doesn't change. Well, there's a lot more. There's a lot more that could be said about God's shadow. But that gives you maybe some thirst. And you go home and get out your concordance or get on the internet and use Bible Gateway or something like that and put the word shadow in. And look at the verses and look at the context of what's said. I think you'll be fascinated by what you see. Words are important in the Bible. Words give great light and great meaning to our subjects, the things we need to study. One day, in many ways, we will be but a shadow. Not literally. But from the standpoint of, as we said in the very second point, we will take our last breath. We will be no more. And what will be really left of us, you might say, well, that's your legacy. Yes, and that's a sermon that's coming up for too awfully long. But what is really left is the memory that folks have of us and the things that we've done. Thus, in many ways, a shadow of ourselves. So it's up to us to be ready. So this evening, if you have need of the Lord's invitation, won't you come while together we stand and sing?